Good morning, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Hello, I'm very glad to welcome you today for our session dedicated to intelligent energy solutions for islands, where we'll try to highlight what is the good balance between local regulation, technology, and public engagement. Before beginning, a few things. I will ask you please to shut your video and mute your micro when speakers are presenting. I also want to let you know that we have direct interpretation both in French and in English. The session will be in English, but you'll be able to listen to the session in French because we have direct interpretation. And you're able on the tab bar on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you're able to select the language you want to listen the session. And finally, you can also use the chat to present yourself, tell us where you come from, and also do not hesitate during the session to ask any questions. So I am Sebastian Dalmas. I'm a partner at Edenway. This is the French and Spanish company expert in sustainable and innovative projects. Today, I have the pleasure to welcome wonderful speakers. We have Christopher Beaumont, the senior of SARC, who will be there. We have Konstantinos Salvatsis from the University of East Anglia. We have Peter Connor from the University of Exeter. Hélène Morin from the Development and Innovation Agency of the Brittany region, and Gwendal Bonk from the Energy and Equipment Association of Municipalities of Finisterre Department. So today, we will first briefly explain what is the intelligent community energy. Then we will introduce sustainable energy solution for islands, the situation, the existing problems, but also the opportunities, and how the ICE project we've been on in the past 4 years proposes concrete solutions. After this introduction, we will see how regulation influences population engagement with energy action. And last part of our session will be dedicated to use cases. We'll have 2 use cases from 2 different islands of the Channel. We will first go through the island of Sark and then the island of Ushant. We have plenty of things to share with you, and the timing is quite tight, but we will be happy, as I've just said, to receive your question on the chat and see how we can answer them, whether during the session or at the end, or maybe also getting in touch with you after this session. So now, I'm pleased to introduce Hélène Morin, who is going to introduce you to the ICE project. So Hélène, welcome. Floor is yours, and if you can share your screen, we'll be happy.
Is it fine? Yes.
Great.
Okay, so hello everybody. I'm very happy to be there today to present you or to introduce to you the workshop. So I am the coordinator of the ICE project. So first I will make a short presentation of the project. So first of all, the project is financed by the Interreg Channel program. It means that main of the activities are located in the Channel area, which is the sea between UK and France. And this is where most of our actions and activities have been implemented. ICE project gathers 9 partners, both from universities, but also organizations that support companies. It is mentioned for, it is a 5 years long project. It started in 2016, and we benefit from €8 million budget to implement all our actions. Here you have all the information about the partners and where they are based and the name of the different organizations. So why have we decided to launch this project and to prepare such proposal? First of all, it is really based on the isolated community needs, what kind of support they require, and especially to face the energy challenges and how they can improve the solution on the islands. So there were two different parameters we want to work on. The first one was to develop and to find a less expensive green energy offer to this specific area. And the other part is related to reliability, because at the moment, what we have noticed, not at the moment, but when we started to work on the project, we noticed that this key element was also important to work on and to make sure that we provide solution reliable enough. What kind of approach have we decided to implement? We can say that it is a systematic approach. What do I mean by that? I mean that it is a combination of different axes, and especially 3.1 to make sure that we cover all the energy cycle from the production through the storage and at the end with the consumption, to make sure that we will work on the different levels, and then one action is also supported by another one in another part of the cycle. What kind of actions and what are the core of the project? It is really based on the implementation, and we have decided to focus on two isolated areas. The first one was in France, the Ushant Island, and later on you will have more precise information about that delivered by Gwendal, who will explain you in details what has been done there. And also we work on the campus of East Anglia, where some sensors and also specific devices were implemented in the student floor, and where we can have some feedback also. Really what we want to do is to test a new solution regarding the different challenges we want to face, and also to improve the solution, because it was just test, and then afterwards make the organizations and the island invest into the approved solution and tested one. What were the main targets of the ICE project? We have two different targets. The first one are the companies offering innovative solutions to the territories. We have decided to start and to set up a network of companies. At the moment, we have 25 companies offering innovative solutions for isolated territories, specifically oriented to the energy system. And in addition, we have also a club of territories, which is the second target, the isolated areas, expressing some specific needs. And our aim really through this project was to make the demand side and the offer side match and find a more accurate solution for the isolated territories. Where we are now, in fact, I told you that we started in 2016. Now we are nearly close to the end of the project. We will stop the activities at the end of December this year, but it is just the first step. I'm convinced of that, because it was just the beginning and the first solution that was developed, and afterwards the idea really is to disseminate and to continue to work on these specific challenges and make sure that we can disseminate the information and the know-how that we have currently collected. So really, our next steps is to share our experiences with other islands, with you today. And I am very happy to leave the floor now to my colleagues, who will explain more in detail what we have performed during these past years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hélène. As you see, everybody, we have many things to share with you, and what we're trying to do at the moment is trying to share our experience, our solutions with many other islands. So hopefully you'll have some lots of information at the end of this session, and we'll be pleased also to continue on sharing experiences with you in the future. So now I'm pleased to welcome Peter Connor. Peter is a senior lecturer in renewable energy policy in the University of Exeter, and he's going to introduce the actual situation regarding renewable energy on the islands. Peter, if you can share your screen.
Okay, so hopefully everyone can see that. As Sebastian introduced me, I'm an associate professor in sustainable energy policy at Exeter. So I've been leading a team of different disciplines, so engineering and policy and a lot of other different areas. We've tried to bring all those things together in the ICE project. So just to set the scene, basically. First of all, I'm just going to go through. I think probably most people on this call will be familiar with all of these things. So, what's the issue at the moment? Well, as with everywhere else in society, islands want to decarbonize. Islands will be one of the places. Many islands will be very vulnerable, in particular, to the effects of climate change, and so they're very much invested in decarbonizing society. Many islands are isolated electrically, not everywhere is, obviously. Some of the islands we've looked at, Scilly particularly in this project, aren't. They're connected to a bigger landmass, but a lot of our places are isolated electrically. They have to generate their own power. And it can be much more expensive to do that on islands than it is somewhere else. So people on those islands are facing higher energy bills, and they're often reliant on things like imported diesel, which makes obviously islands very vulnerable to supply, but also to price fluctuations. And if the expectation is we're going to see increases in the price of fossil fuels over time, then that makes renewable energy, that makes islands vulnerable to high rising prices. And obviously islands still need that secure supply of power. They still need to for various reasons, they need to maintain industries, they need to maintain comfort for people, and keep the fundamentals of living going. And some islands are actually really vulnerable to losing their electricity, and it can make them uninhabitable. And so there's kind of this trilemma of cost versus maintaining security of supply, but at the same time trying to protect the environment. And potentially renewable energy offers a solution to that trilemma. And it used to be that renewable energy was really expensive in all its forms, but as it's come down, as the prices come down, then it's possible that it might actually be able to address all three of those key elements. So they have been more expensive, but now they're not, basically. And as they come down, then the number of locations that they can be economically viable has increased. And so a lot of what we're doing in this was to try and help islands to be able to have the tools to assess whether renewable energy might be the better option for them, might be more economic than the diesel fuel that they've been relying on, and at the same time not undercut the reliability and security of supply, because that just isn't an acceptable outcome, to have a fall in security of supply. So we basically set out to create some tools to address that, and things we've done already, things we've completed. So we've come up with a general methodology. So it's very heavily tied into the first island assessment we did on the island of Ushant off the coast of Brittany, and that's downloadable. You can get that from our website. What we did was we also, because obviously we're academics, so we had a lot of theory around this as well to support the what was going on in the method. But what we've done is we've pulled all that theory out, and it's in a second document. So you can either read the whole thing, or you can just read the sort of bit that's of interest to you, and you can leave the theoretical underpinnings to one side, and so we get a much shorter document. If you want to look at our Ushant specific case study, then that's available. We're currently doing 5 other island reports, and we basically set these up so that we could test the general methodology. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that applied and talk about those islands in a bit. And then the idea is, once we finish those island reports, we will modify the general methodology to account for that island experience. So the islands we looked at, so we started with Ushant, which is obviously a French island, and it's subject to French regulation, and it fits in the French electricity system. It's off-grid, it's not connected to the mainland. So to test things, we looked at some UK islands. So we looked at the Isles of Scilly, which is interesting to us because they've had some smart energy stuff underway already. They've been working with Hitachi there to do different projects on the island, and we wanted to use that as a sort of UK standard location. We looked at Lundy, which is a small island off the coast of Devon, in the Bristol Channel, so just to the north of Devon. And it's privately owned. It's owned and run by a charity which redevelops private houses that are historically of interest, and it's a nature reserve, and there are all sorts of issues with improving security of supply, improving how many hours of electricity are available. And the fact that it's privately owned and sort of outside the regulatory framework was also of interest to us. In France, we looked at 2 other islands, Chorzy, which we were interested in because it has a relatively low population compared to what we'd already looked at. So we wanted to do something that was sort of on the edges of what we had before. And then we looked at Malène, which is a kind of sits in the same cluster of islands as Ushant. And we wanted to kind of use that as our control again. And then latterly, in the sort of towards the end of the project, we've also started to look at Sark. We are quite keen to look at an island which was outside French or UK control, but we had to wait for approval to basically be able to spend money on that and the EU regulations. And we wanted to look at Sark because it's different, particularly because it's independent. It's not part of the UK system. It's not part of the French system. It's an island in itself. It governs itself. It has links to Guernsey, but it effectively governs itself. I'm not going to dig too much into this because Christopher Beaumont is going to be able to tell us much more about the Sark situation. We had some links there already. We did a field trip there a couple of years ago, but Sark also has this big issue that it's got very high energy prices and it's got some issues with infrastructure. And so there's a lot of different factors that made Sark very interesting to us. So what are the issues that sort of have arisen? Well, one of the key things for me as an energy policy academic is the regulation. And so we were able to look at things like this, are you looking at what the resources on the island were and looking at different scenarios and coming up with scenarios for getting whatever fraction up to 100% of renewables and whether that was possible and whether it was publicly acceptable. But for me, potentially the biggest difference was that made a real impact is the regulation. And how the islands were regulated. Often, certainly for the UK and France, but for a lot of other locations, regulation is written for the mainland. So if you're an island attached to a bigger country, then you're going to be subject to regulation that was written for the whole of the country. And that often doesn't apply very well to an island. And that can make things really tricky. So if we just compare some of the issues that arose from that, in looking at the UK and French islands that we looked at. In France, the costs of energy is socialized. So wherever you live, whether it's in mainland France, in the center of Paris, or in Brittany, or on a French island like Réunion or Ushant, or Malène or Chorzy, then you pay pretty much the same amount of money. And that the costs then socialized across all consumers in France. And that's pretty good if you're a consumer. It's pretty good if you're on an island because it protects you from high costs, but you're not incentivized to change to something else. If you're paying the true cost of energy, then potentially you're very incentivized to try and find an alternative. And if renewables is cheaper, then you're incentivized to switch. But if you're not paying the cost, if it's been picked up by everybody, then that's a big deal. And we don't have that system in the UK. So an independent island in the UK would essentially be paying the real costs of things. And in a lot of places, that's also true. Certainly it's true in Sark. It's possibly more true in Sark than anywhere else in the world, actually, that you're paying the real cost of electrical generation. So there's all sorts of issues then with whether the people who are making money out of the current situation want to change. So it basically is a big question is whether the French utility is more invested in the status quo than in actually having the change. And so that creates this issue of who's going to spend money on the alternative, who's going to pay for the change to renewables, who's going to spend money on those solar panels or that wind farm. It might also have an impact on some other decisions. So one of the things that, because electricity is cheap in the French islands, people use electricity for heating rather than import lots of diesel oil, which is what happens on lots of the other islands to provide heat energy. So if you use your electricity and you're running up your electricity bill by using that for heat, switching to a heat pump in that situation might be a big advantage. So when we looked at the numbers for Ushant and the numbers for Sark for electrically driven heat pumps look really attractive on Ushant, but they look a lot less attractive on Sark just because of that difference. So the difference in regulation, the difference in where you start has a big impact on what comes out of our recommendations and how you apply the methodology. So and in many cases, probably it's the old joke of how do I get from here to there? And the answer is, well, you don't want to start from here, basically. Some places will start from a very difficult position. So some of the issues then, regulation might incentivize the incumbent approach. So regulation might make it easier to keep doing what you're doing or for whoever's got the money to keep doing what they're doing rather than make the change. So that can be a big barrier to that transition to renewables on an island. Who's going to pay, basically? Other issues can have an impact. So one of the things we were very keen to do within the project was to have try to invest in finding out what people thought on the island and on the islands that we were looking at. And that obviously that was made considerably harder by COVID because we couldn't visit them. But with Ushant, certainly we made a big effort to do that. And Konstantinos is also going to talk about the effort that were made on his campus in terms of reaching out to the actual energy users. Other things can make a difference. Planning can be a big issue. It can be a barrier, or it might not be a barrier in some places where it's planning but doesn't really apply. Nature protection can be a big deal. So in the Isles of Scilly, in Lundy, in Ushant, there's a lot of legislation and regulation around nature protection because it's big for bird life or other animal life, and people go there specifically to see the nature. So that can lead to opposition, and rightly so. You know, you don't want to put a wind turbine in the middle of a migration pathway for rare birds. That would be a disaster. So you do have to be careful with things like that. And what we wanted to do was make sure any changes in energy supply are rooted in the needs of the community. And we tried to work with the local communities to do that. But how that happens will have to vary from island to island, depend on things like what's gone on before. And again, just to emphasize in that kind of issue, but in other issues as well, like regulation, islands with a mainland will present a very different challenge than independent islands. So we've mostly looked at islands with a mainland because this was supported by funding channel initiative. Interreg Channel funded us, which is based in France and England. But we definitely see that there are issues that will arise on an island that's attached to a mainland rather than an independent island. But we think our methodology will apply to both. It's just that you'll have to consider different factors. So just to talk about the general methodology a little bit. So essentially we based our methodology on something called the action-oriented playbook. I'm not going to go through all 7 of those things on the list. It's basically an iterative process where you work through looking at things like, what are our objectives? In Ushant, the island told us they wanted to work towards 100% renewables. So we set that as our target, and we tried to and we looked at what energy demand looked like on the island, so we knew how much capacity we had to have. We looked at what the options were. One of the things specifically on Ushant was to look at whether we could integrate a tidal device that was being tested in the waters around Ushant, but then how could we make up for the gaps in generation from that device with solar, with wind, with energy storage. Once we'd looked at some scenarios, and we had scenarios that we thought could get us to 100%, we looked at how it impacted system and reliability. And in many ways, a lot of the storage recommendations that we make are about making sure that the system is reliable and doesn't fall over in periods where it's not sunny or windy, for example, or the tidal device isn't operating. And so we fed that into trying to come up with credible scenarios and then a plan for actually delivering that. So not all islands will be able to install a wind turbine, for example. Some because of protected areas, some because it's just really hard to get the wind turbine to the island potentially. So there's all sorts of issues. And then we look at the economics of doing this as well, and whether it's a more feasible option economically than sticking with diesel. So some key points: renewables, new technologies, storage. They're getting cheaper, and they may present an opportunity for energy island systems to access cheaper energy, which also stops reliability on imports, and also, as an extra bonus, stops you from producing CO2 or reduces what you produce. It's absolutely vital to engage with local communities, to work with communities to find out what they want and what they don't want, what their needs are in terms of energy consumption. Are you going to include heat? Are you going to exclude heat when you're talking about electricity? Or what's the situation? You need to listen. You need to work with them from the start. Ideally, you'll also see if you can get some local benefits. So can this transition benefit local companies? Can it create jobs? There's really good evidence that if communities can see that they're benefiting locally, or their local community is benefiting from a job or from money coming in or from stopping money going out, that can make a huge difference to acceptability. And again, and that basically goes to this point, which is essentially if you can advance skills and get jobs for local people, that can make a big difference to acceptability. You have to consider different business models. You know, who's gonna own the renewable energy? Who's gonna pay for it? Are you gonna have, potentially you could have people having a share in a wind turbine or a solar farm, so they actually can generate some of their own power rather than have an external company. And we see that model more and more in different countries. You have to be realistic about supply options there. You have to consider how much potential you have. But also, you know, if you're in the far north, then maybe solar panel is not going to be worth it. Maybe it is. It depends what you're paying for your diesel. Maybe you want to make your sort of options diverse if you can. So if you can use wind and solar rather than just wind or solar, then that might be the way to go. You also, it's not just about putting renewables in. It's also about, can we do some energy efficiency first? I mentioned heat pumps. We talk about heat pumps as a renewable energy source, but really, they're an energy efficiency device. They're about, you know, instead of burning electricity for heat to sort of the 95 to 100% efficiency in your house, put it through a heat pump, you can get 300 or 400% efficiency. But there's a lot of other things you can do. You can improve the material of the buildings on your island, or you can work with people so they're actually using energy less. And there are some interesting things with this as well. So I think some islands where energy is particularly expensive, they actually think very hard about energy efficiency, but there's a lot of potential there on islands, as there is on mainlands, to actually improve energy efficiency overall. So those are some key things to bear in mind, and that brings us to the end of my part of the talk. So I'm going to hand you back to Sebastian.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your presentation. We have actually lots of questions on the chat, and very interesting one. I'm afraid we're not going to be able to answer all the questions, but I've written down some of the questions, and I will keep this question for the end of our session. So thank you very much, Peter, again. Now I welcome Konstantinos Salvatsis. Konstantinos is a professor in sustainable energy business and in the University of East Anglia. Actually, consumer engagement has been a big part of our research and experimentation during our project. And actually, we've been really interested in understanding how regulation influences population engagement with different energy actions. We have some questions already on the chat regarding this topic. So, Konstantinos, I'll let you on your presentation. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, Sebastian. So can you hear me? Is my sound okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So hi, I'm Konstantinos Salvatsis from the University of East Anglia, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what we found regarding regulation and the regulation's impact on population engagement, specifically with energy action. I'll use some snippets and some key pieces of information, mostly to trigger further questions, because it's a topic that I think requires an exchange of knowledge, an exchange of information, and it's not a topic that can be exhausted really with just one research project. It just keeps growing and keeps the learning going. So without further ado, let me continue by saying it's the energy transition that we're all working on clearly, and it's a reminder for all of us that this is not just a technological transition, but rather a regulatory transition as well, and a public participation transition as well. And I'm highlighting there the just word because it has at least two different meanings in this particular context. I'll get to that again very soon. Now, beginning with what I would call a typology of user engagement. I'm sorry that's again not exhaustive. It's just a way to map things. There are ways to consider consumers or energy users overall as citizens and engage them at the strategic level of designing upstream resources for energy when there is no clear vision of what is needed. So you bring in users to decide that collectively, or there might be options where you talk to consumers directly. So a standard consumer, for example, would be thinking a little bit more along the lines of the more basic choices that they make, but again, choices that do have an impact. So for example, changing supplier for energy, if that is an option. And maybe these suppliers can provide energy from different types. So again, these are small things, but will have an impact, or a little bit more investment heavy things, like, for example, efficiency retrofits on a specific household that they own. Or again, going back to the suppliers and choice of tariffs, time of use tariffs, for example, can have a very significant impact on how an energy user interacts with the energy system. So again, that's a type of engagement in a way. And then, of course, you move to the more active participation in the energy system, and that is none else, than what we call the prosumer, which I'm sure it's a term that has been used and even overused over the last maybe about 8-7 years or so, and that's where you really see the concept of production. So it's not just about deciding how you will consume your energy, but also the production element of it. So that would require some sort of solar panels on the household or whatever is suitable for the specific situation. And it goes all the way down to increasing the demand for electricity for a specific household into branching out into non-household consumptions, as in, for example, when you have an electric vehicle and you charge it at home. Previously, you weren't having to drill for petrol or oil at your household, at your garden. You would be just buying this from externally. But when you charge your electric car at home, then suddenly that becomes a household energy consumption, which could be, in theory, with a large roof at least and a lot of sun, could be charged from the sun. Or you could be moving into non-house specific energy types, such as, for example, community initiatives. So with this typology in mind, I will be going through a few of the regulatory examples we have found that have an impact on user engagement. And it's specifically the flavor here, as Peter mentioned earlier, is very much focused on the Channel area, France and the UK, but they're by no means specific to these areas. I think having looked a little bit further out, they do get replicated in many other countries, and there's a lot of variability along other countries. So in the UK, some of the good things we're finding is that there's a very straightforward framework for switching suppliers. So and that is in the UK from the UK's point of view, that's a good system of increasing competition, which I have to say so far has been targeted predominantly towards price competition. So you can easily, have websites that allow you to compare tariffs and switch you from one tariff to another. It doesn't take long. I've done it a few times myself. It's a very straightforward process, and it's one that encourages competitive pricing and broader competition among suppliers. I don't think it encourages enough competition for green credentials among suppliers, I would add here. But anyway, that's a broader discussion. But it's nevertheless a good system to enable suppliers to compete with each other and become better. Now, further to that, there are initiatives that enable people to improve their households, particularly when it comes to energy efficiency, and that's specifically to vulnerable consumers who wouldn't be able to afford such schemes otherwise. And then there is also quite a broad range of infrastructure installers for EV charging and so on, which is becoming a growing issue as we go along. I have here, the existence of citizens' assemblies as well, from the very strategic point of view of, the broader energy policy questions that can be answered through, taking in the population's input. But I will move you to the next slide to say that citizens' assemblies per se in the UK, they're great for discussing things and bringing out, good ideas and good outcomes, but these aren't binding. Okay? So the power of these citizen assemblies, they're not necessarily what I would call, legally binding and ready to produce results. So I think it's a good first stage, but it's not really where we would like this to be for user engagement. Then in terms of how policy broadly sees the consumer, that is generally thin and still misses what I would argue, is a very broad range of roles that consumers take, the kind of typology I showed you earlier a little bit more. Then the other thing is that we have been gradually seeing an erosion of attractiveness for household energy production. I mean, that has happened everywhere. And of course, to some degree it has been justified because energy infrastructure costs have been coming down. So of course, the investment costs for, putting a solar roof, for example, have been coming down. So the subsidies for these schemes have had to come down as well. But the result is that, generally speaking, these are not particularly attractive financially right now. People still do them, and still, there is a profit to be made, but it's not as attractive as it used to be. And last thing, that it's something that Peter mentioned as well, and that is that we have variable tariffs depending on the location you are, which often expose consumers to real costs, which can be a good thing from one hand because you understand what the real costs are, but for some vulnerable consumers, it can be really detrimental because it means energy can be very expensive. So that's for the UK. Moving now to France, other regulatory aspects we saw here is that there is a very clear framework for citizen participation in energy policy and infrastructure, that types of citizens assemblies. But the difference in France is that these produce mandatory results. So they're taken a lot more seriously. They're way more structured, but a lot more serious as well in terms of results and the use of these results. Now, moving on from that, there's this issue that there is a very large, broad set of policies and citizen-led activities, not least some that what we found was that there was an implicit willingness from a regulatory standpoint to change the law, to adapt the law, in other words, in ways, as soon as new data would emerge, as soon as new consultations would emerge, these changes were to happen. And we found a couple of examples for that were really encouraging. For example, the change of distance limitations for inclusion to energy collectives that were very restrictive previously, and gradually they have become a lot more open and more welcoming for participants. Or the removal of the 5-year experimental period for collective self-consumption facilities. Again, that has been removed in 2020 to allow for kind of a permanent status, so to speak, so allowing for a much more higher security level for energy users who are playing a role in these collectives. At the same time, what we're seeing is that France probably, to some degree, I want to be cautious by saying this, but it looks like it over-regulates. So everything seems to be a little bit too structured. And I say this from a very UK standpoint, where probably here we do partly the opposite in a way, particularly in the energy market. So in a way, it feels that this over-reliance on regulation sometimes can hinder innovation and can hinder growth, because it doesn't allow, I think, the private sector to grow as fast as it could otherwise grow. Then we have that energy communities still limited to low voltage networks. So again, that doesn't seem to be encouraging very much for larger electricity consumers that could have even, I would say, a greater impact in the network. And then the last bit is lack of awareness. What seems to be a significant lack of awareness. We've seen that in a few studies, that even though there are good policies and there are interesting programs, that they're not always, widespreadly known among the public. That is for France. Now, looking a little bit from the kind of wider picture of how the EU approaches this topic, previous speakers have mentioned, and I'm sure it has been mentioned quite a lot in this summit, that with every regulatory attempt that a large organization attempts, so for example, the EU, it's the mainlands that are mostly taken into account, and that is really missing the opportunity for the islands. In the EU, this has been acknowledged, and the Clean Energy for EU Islands initiative has been launched back in 2017, and led to a memorandum of understanding in 2020, led also to a new secretariat. So it is ramping up its roles and its responsibilities and its momentum. I'd say all the right elements of that. So it aims to reduce renewable energy costs, improve economic development based on these lower energy costs. At the same time, bring together visions that island communities have. Some very good wording there about locally owned and managed finance solutions. And what I'd say, though, as a criticism to that, is that so far, other than good planning, good initiatives, good ideas, this hasn't had its own funding, this hasn't had its own resources in a way. So I would say that probably that's the next step in order to avoid reducing the impact on delivering this agenda, which I think is really paramount and really important. Now, as conclusions from the few things we've seen within this project, but broadly as well, is that policy obviously is not designed specifically for the benefit of islands. Islands tend to be clearly more reliant on fossil fuels, and their energy supply security suffers as a result. Peter has shown quite a few examples of that. Islands are exposed to immediate effects of climate change, so it is even more important that really problems are solved for islands. So it's not just that they're a minor corner of the EU or other territories. It's that they really suffer and they really need solutions ASAP. Then for the EU specifically, the EU has 2,200 inhabited islands with about 4% of the EU's total population living there. So clearly, a just transition for islands and islanders is the goal, very much unlike what we see in the coal lobby, for example, in the coal areas, that there is the just transition narrative played along the EU and broader. I think we need a just transition for islands and islanders as a new paradigm now that will move us ahead. Thank you very much. That was all of my talk.
And thank you very much, Konstantinos. I liked your last sentence. I think, yeah, we need a just transition for islands and islanders. Although I've been seeing in the chat that the word just changes from one country to the other, one island to the other, and one person to the other. So it shows that, the balance between technology, public engagement, local regulation is complicated, and but we do need to find a kind of alchemy so that we find this justice for islanders and island. Thank you very much, Konstantinos. We are now done with the first part of our session, and now we're going to deal with concrete case studies. So as I have explained, use cases from the island of Sark and the island of Ushant. And I'm really pleased to now introduce Christopher Beaumont. Christopher is the senior of Sark since 2016, and I'm really happy to introduce him. And he will explain you what is Sark, where is Sark, what is experiencing Sark. So Christopher, please go on. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Sebastian, very much. I hope I'm clear enough. So the island of Sark, let's start with, why is this not working? So I've got a problem with my, let's just
maybe Christopher, you have to go on your PowerPoint directly to change one slide from to the other.
Yeah, I know, but it's not. There we go. Okay, seems to be working now. So Sark, we are very close to France, part of the British Isles, and you can see our location just to the west of Cherbourg and north of Saint-Malo. So what are we? We are an independent island with our own independent government. We were repopulated back in Elizabethan times. We were feudal from 1565 right the way through until 13 years ago when we became a democracy. So we are a very new democracy and we're still finding our feet. We're 10 kilometers from our nearest neighbor, which is a bigger island of Guernsey. We're only 40 kilometers from France, and I can see that from the top of my house. We have no physical connections to any other island. Our telephony and internet connections, all that sort of thing, come via a microwave link. We are 5 square kilometers, and we have about 500 inhabitants, which makes us a really low density population island. And we have about 300 houses. The economy is very much based around tourism. There is no industry of any type that uses energy. We have no exports as a result. And also, rather novelly, we have no cars either, although we do have the odd tractor. We are a low tax regime, and we run on a really small annual budget. I think the island's annual budget is around £1.5 million a year. We have no income tax, no business tax, none of the normal taxes you would associate with a grown-up economy. But because we're independent, low taxes mean you can't pay for things. So we have no welfare state, we don't have free healthcare, we don't have pensions. The regulations are really light and in some cases completely non-existent. So for example, there is no employment law on SARC. And the other really important thing is there is no data. So there's no information about almost every aspect of life on SARC. It's all by word of mouth. And that's not helpful. And Peter will have found that extremely difficult when he was here doing his study with Exeter University. So our reality, energy consumption, we import every ounce of energy we consume. And most of that must be 90% will be via fuel oil. So because electricity is expensive, and you've heard that from Peter, domestic hot central heating and domestic hot water is provided in the main by oil-fired boilers. And we import 500,000 litres of fuel oil a year for that purpose. We do generate electricity, and there's a private monopoly company that does so, and it imports, as you can see, 450,000 litres to run its generators. Most people cook with gas, and that comes to the island in cylinders. I don't know, and I don't know of anyone who does know how much gas comes onto the island, and it's predominantly used for cooking. And we do have agricultural machinery, so tractors, and we do have horticultural machinery, mowers, and that sort of thing. So some diesel and petrol is also used on the island. So turning to our provision. So if you take out the oil used for central heating and water supply, electricity is provided by a private company. It is the only provider of electricity. It is entirely fossil fuel dependent. It only has diesel generators to drive the power. It has antiquated and inefficient equipment, which is in some cases over 50 years old. But it is regulated for price. Now that's a good thing, and it's also a bad thing. So it protects the customer from a greedy supplier, but it protects the supplier from not making a profit. So that has an effect of stalling the company from doing anything different. We do have a high price. It's 85 pence a unit currently, which is about 80 cents. So that's 4 or 5 times what you might find in the US. But excuse me, I guess that's a realistic, unsubsidized cost. We have low consumption, and I suspect that's because of the high price. So we're only producing, well, the power station is only producing 1.2 gigawatt hours per year. And as I've said, there is absolutely no incentive to change. So the high electricity cost drives alternatives to do the things we need to do, and that's oil and gas. And as we know, those alternatives are burning fossil fuel, so they're bad. And the current production is entirely based on burning fossil fuel, so that's bad too. So the potential is absolutely there. And Peter and his team from Exeter came over and showed that there's plenty of solar capability. We're on the 49th parallel. It's perfectly reasonable to be generating power from the sun. There's plenty of wind on the island. I think the average wind speed across the year, although it varies seasonally, is about 6 meters a second, which is just fine for generating power most of the time. And there are some niche possibilities that we could use, such as biodigesters, but mostly solar and wind. So the renewable solution is absolutely possible and feasible. But just like everywhere else, those obstacles exist, and I've heard them from both Peter and other presenters. We don't have any energy policies from government, so government aren't leading with a vision of whether or not renewable supply is a good thing. We have no access, or the government has no access to public finance. It, by regulation, is not allowed to go into debt. We don't have any eligibility for UK, or for that matter, EU funding. We have a completely antiquated infrastructure, and that applies to the housing stock as well as the suppliers' infrastructure. So the house I live in was built in 1860. It's very difficult to see how that can be improved thermally. The utility company is a monopoly, which means we have absolutely no competition. There are frequent disputes between the company, the regulator, and the government, and that just sticks things, and we find it very difficult to move on. We have no energy roadmap from the government, and there's very little community engagement, which is very important. So the future is likely for us to be a stalemate. And until the political will emerges to make a change, and until the utility provider changes, or one or the other, I think utility provider changing is the main driver, we're going to be stuck where we are. And that's not to say that some individuals haven't taken a stand, and I have joined them, and I am now independent from the electricity supplier, and I've taken over with a large solar array of providing this house with its own electricity. However, it does come with issues. Just as Helen was starting to speak, one of my inverters threw a temperature error, and it switched off the system, and I was without power for about 30 seconds, but it then took 5 minutes for everything to come back to life. And that's just something you have to live with when you're on an independent supply. And I've also taken the stand to get an electric tractor. So I'm exporting my energy on a sunny day to charge up my electric tractor, which I use to do various jobs around the estate. So that's where SARC is. We're in a stalemate. We're in this stalemate until we get strong government doing something positive, or the utility provider making the necessary changes. And my fear is that we'll be here for some time. And I look forward to hearing anyone's views on how we can change that situation. And that's me done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Really interesting to learn about SOC, to better understand the situation. Actually, when we listen to you, I mean, the solution is there. I think that we cannot but change, and on your island, renewable energy solutions are available. So I think that when you say sadly, we may be here for some time. Hopefully, I say, all together we'll be able to push the right solution. But maybe I have one question for you, because how do you explain that community engagement is low on your island?
Well, it needs to be driven by either government or the company that supplies electricity, because only those two are able to change the situation we have. And at the moment, the company and the government aren't really talking to each other and on a meaningful basis. So it's difficult for either of them to act independently without getting sniped at from the other. So I feel that they need to step away from each other and come back to the population and say, is renewable something you wish us to take forward? And if they had that endorsement, but they have to ask the question first, and that's lacking at the moment. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much again, Christopher, for your presentation. So now I will ask Gwendal Wonk to enter the session. Gwendal is a project manager at the SDEF. He's been really close to the experimentation on Ushant. He's been really close to the technology, but also the community, the local community on Ushant. So I'm very interested to listen to your presentation, Gwendal, on where we are and the experimentation you're on in Ushant at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Hello, everyone from all around the world, apparently in the chat. So let me just put my presentation. Normally it's okay. So hello everyone, my name is Gwendal Wonk. I'm project manager at the SDEF. The SDEF is the Energy and Equipment Association of Municipalities of Finistère, France. The Finistère is a French administrative area, also referred as a department. The historical action of the SDEF is to manage and develop the electricity network owned by the municipalities. And lately, the SDEF is developing projects for municipalities such as renewable installation or energy management actions in public buildings. So my presentation is about the island of Ushant, one of the experimental sites of the ICE project. The island is located about 25 kilometers to the west of mainland France. And you can see on the middle satellite map the Finistère area outlined in red and the orange circle displaying Ushant. The island surface area is about 15 square kilometers, and one of the main characteristics of the island is that it's not electrically connected to the continental grid and possesses its own microgrid. The Ushant population reaches 862 permanent inhabitants for almost 500 households. The population density is around 60 inhabitants per square kilometer. The working population accounts for 1/3 of the population, and the age distribution analysis shows that the population have a high share of people older than 60. Regarding buildings, the island counts a total of 1,000 residences with a high share of secondary residents. Most of the residents are individual houses. Ushant welcomes around 150,000 tourists per year, which results in a daily population of up to 3,000 persons per day in summer. And there are around 180 tourist accommodation for a total of 2,300 beds. And regarding the mobility, there are around 500 vehicles on the island with a driven distance of only 2,000 kilometers per year per vehicle, resulting in a total annual mileage of 1 million kilometers per year. Regarding energy context, as isolated territories, Ushant needs to import fuel oil for electricity production, around 1,600 tons per year, and also fuel oil for the heating of large buildings. Vehicle fuels need to be imported too, and to a lesser extent, wood and gas bottles are also imported for the heating. On the other hand, the island needs to export all the municipal wastes. As there is no gas grid nor heat network, the main energy vector is electricity. Therefore, the energy transition of Ushant is currently mainly focused on electricity. With an oceanic climate and near the 48° north line of latitude, the temperature varies along the year, resulting in a high seasonal variation, as can be seen on the left-hand side. This graphic shows the monthly electric consumption over a 7-year period. We can clearly see a peak in winter and a smaller peak in summer. One of the particularities of the microgrid of the island is that until 2016, it was only based on fuel oil generators. In order to ensure the security of the electricity supply, there are redundant generators, resulting in a high production cost, around 400 euro per megawatt hour, while it is around 60 euro per megawatt hour in continental France. In France, there is a standardization of electricity tariff for citizens all over the territory, as explained by Peter. As a result, although electricity production cost is higher on Ushant than in mainland France, the inhabitants of Ushant pay the electricity the same as the one on the mainland. As other energy sources, such as wood, gas, or oil, represent an additional cost to overall energy bill, the main heating device on Ushant are electric heaters. In parallel, the age distribution of the households show a high proportion of old buildings. As a result, the residential sector represents 70% of the electric consumption, 40% of which is used for heating purposes only. This shows the importance of improving the energy efficiency of residential properties. The following timeline is a good visual way to understand the genesis of the energy transition of Ushant. In the early 2000s, the French network operator and electric producer EDF needed to replace some generating capacity. New fuel oil generators were implemented in 2005. In 2010, the Association of Ponant Island, which federates 15 islands on the French west coast, started to reflect on the energy transition needs for the 3 non-connected islands, Saint, Molène, and Ushant in the green circle, all part of the Finistère department. In 2012, the first program called General Interest Program was set up to help undertake house renovating activities with a financial and technical support to the property owners. This program has been renewed and is still operating today. In 2015, the Association of Islands was granted 2 regional and national programs, the Local Energetic Loop and Positive Energy Territory for Green Growth, for a total of 600,000 euros to benefit to the islands of Finistère. This program led to actions such as the replacement of streetlights by LED bulbs, the promotional campaign for inhabitants and visitors. On the right, this is an example of sticker distributed to hostel and other tourism accommodation. And as a result of these 2 programs, the energy consumption and therefore the CO2 emission decreased by 25% within the 3 non-connected islands. In 2016, as part of the new French governmental energy multi-annual program for the period 2018-2023, the island set ambitious strategic objectives for their transition, aiming to reach 100% renewable by 2030, with the first milestone of 50% by 2023. Besides these initiatives was a European Interreg-funded project called Merific, which aimed to identify specific opportunities and issues faced by peripheral and island communities in exploiting marine renewable energy resources. Ushant was one of the pilot sites of the project. The outcome of this initial project brought the idea of a tidal turbine for Ushant. This in turn led to the new funding application for the ICE project to look further into the development and implementation of innovative energy production solutions for isolated territories. A 250 kilowatt tidal turbine is currently tested during the ICE project, and it could technically develop up to 1 megawatt. In 2017, the first renewable plant in Ushant was installed, and it is a 54 kilowatt peak photovoltaic installation on the sports hall roof, contributing to save every year more than 20,000 liters of fuel. I will now present you two actions that are ongoing on Ushant in the ICE project. The first one regarding a technical solution to automatically monitor the electric heaters, and the second one concerning a technical solution to include the citizen in the smart grid through information about the grid status. The first action is called exemplary public buildings. The idea is to add connected switches to the electric heaters and hot water boilers in order to allow a planification of consumption as well as a remote control. A schedule is filled by building users, and based on the schedule, the consuming devices are automatically turned off or on. On the bottom left, you have two photos of the supervision in the building, and on the right, two images of the online supervision with the reservation page on the top and the supervision at the bottom, with analysis and graphical display of each building. Here, for example, you can have the temperature in the building, the power consumption, the occupation of the building. Regarding the technical side of this experimentation, this is a success. I present you here the consumption profile of the public library. So you can see here the power demand at a 30-minute time frame unit for the period November 2020, February 2021. There is a continuous consumption linked to the electric heaters, plus a periodic consumption in the mornings and afternoon. The monitoring was in place from 16th of March, with an occupation planning in the day from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday to Friday, plus Saturday mornings. The analysis show clearly a concentration of consumption on the opening hour and no consumption after 5 p.m. Some days, a small consumption was recording in the night from 3 to 8 a.m. in order to maintain a minimum temperature in the building, which was 16 degrees Celsius. As a result, the average daily consumption dropped from 25 kilowatt-hour per day to 16 kilowatt-hour per day, which represents a 38% energy saving. A more detailed analysis consists of analyzing the daily consumption versus the outside average daily temperature on the bottom right of the screen. Each green point is a data from the reference period 2019-2020. Red points are the data with the heater monitoring. The blue points are the reference data with similar outside average temperature than the data with monitoring. This representation allows to determine the so-called thermosensitivity of a building, which is the value of the slope of the linear regression with an interception at 15 degrees Celsius. The thermosensitivity is expressed in kilowatt-hour per day per degree Celsius and represents the increase of energy demand of a building for each degree below 15 degrees Celsius. This analysis showed that the monitoring of electric heaters in red reduces the consumption's peak. If this infrastructure is broadly deployed, the schedule could be transmitted to the production in order to forecast the consumption. This infrastructure could also contribute to consumption erasure with a signal from the production asking to shut down in peak period. However, this requires further study and test. Although the validation of the technical aspect of this solution, the experience still needs improvement to be done on the user point of view. The solution has been developed mainly on the technical point of view, resulting in a lack of a communication with the municipal staff during the conception phase. This lack of communication is partly due to remote situation of the island, plus the COVID-19 context, reducing the possibility of meetings. The municipal staff, although interested and in favor of projects in energy savings, are already busy with everyday activities. This new experimentation is understandably not the most urgent for them, and that do not help to involve them in the experimentation. Nevertheless, The first preliminary results are promising, and we will plan a meeting with the staff before the coming winter in order to get them familiar with the technical aspects, with the aim to increase again the energy saving on the island. The second action aimed to include the population in the experimentation through information towards the consumer in order to reach the prosumer concept as presented by Konstantinos. However, before developing the technical solution, we had to get in touch with the population in order to communicate about us and about the project, but also in order to understand the global context on the island. To do so, 4 surveys have been conducted by the Association of Ponant Island, which involve 50 different people at a time from 2018 from 2021, resulting in a total of 200 people interviewed, over 860 inhabitants. These surveys aim to understand the perception of the inhabitants about the energy transition, and especially the transition on their island, with the different technical solutions such as solar energy, tidal energy, wind energy. We also asked people if they were interested to participate in experimentation in the frame of the ICE project by using smart grid technologies. In addition to this survey, several public meetings were organized from 2018 to 2019 in order to communicate about the energy transition action, especially the ICE action. The electric consumption varies over the year, as I presented to you, in winter and in summer, but also on a daily basis, as shown by this graphic. In addition, as you know, renewable energy such as solar, wind, or tidal are variable over the day, and therefore, if we aim to maximize the use of renewable energy when available and limit the use of fuel oil, the information of the electric grid status should be transmitted to the consumers so that they could act with full knowledge. The second action relies on a communication interface displaying a range of color in relation to grid status on Ushant. The idea is to give a simple and efficient information. Green means high renewable production and low consumption. Red means low renewable and high consumption. White somewhere in between. We aimed to experiment two types of this object. The first one simply displaying the color, and the second one displaying the color plus more detailed information about the households. As our experiment involved a small amount of objects, the solution offered by the service supplier was to have a single object that can make the two functionalities. In addition, the object displays the CO2 content, the humidity content, and the temperature of the room. And with this color signal, the population can choose to consume at the best period, but it will only affect consumption from washing machine, dryer, oven, etc. We will analyze the consumption profile of the inhabitants and see if we can find a correlation with the color and their consumption. In other words, we expect to observe a consumption increase with the green light when we expect to observe a decrease with red light. We will then quantify the impact of information on the consumption profile with this type of object. The distribution of the object took place at the end of July, so we should have the first results, the first set of data available by the end of this month. And with these technical bricks, the population can actively participate to the adaptability of the grid. These two actions I presented to you contribute to the beginning of a smart grid on Ushant, which will connect production to consumption in order to reach the 100% renewable target in 2030. Thank you for your attention. If you have any question, feel free to contact me afterwards with my mail address. I'll let now Sebastian and Helen for the closure of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Gwenda, for this presentation of the experimentation on Ushant, giving us some really good information regarding the engagement of the community and also the possibility of the good use of the technology. We are now close to the end of our session, and I will ask Hélène to come back to make a general conclusion. And then if we have some time we'll be able to take some questions and try to answer them. Hélène, are you there? I don't know if
yes,
you're...
I'm there. Just making sure. Okay, is this full screen? That's great.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. So rapidly, we can make conclusion and leave the time for any questions and discussion about what we have done. So first of all, I would like to thank all the speakers. I am very proud of all the partners and all the actions that have been done in the frame of this project. What we aim today with this specific workshop was to show all the potential of renewable energy on the different territories. And we also want to make a focus on some specific parameters such as regulation and the influence of how we can implement a transition and how we can get the inhabitants involved in the process. And also what we want to be optimistic and also demonstrate that there is a huge potential for all the islands and that we can deploy and implement new solutions. For the coming actions and what we plan to do in the coming months, in the remaining time we have for the project is to disseminate and also to share our experiences. And I will just start and explain you that we have set up a club of territories. It was launched last year, so it gathers all the islands or specific non-connected territories that could join the club, and what we can benefit from by joining the club is on first hand to have information like today about what we are doing and all the know-how that we have produced, and also benefit from a replication and test some solution. For those that are currently in the club, here is just a brief overview of the items that are currently implementing some solutions. I will not get into detail of each and every project, but it is just to give you an idea of what could be done. On the island, we work with the Isle of Wight about IG and how to vary IG through by methanizations, for instance. We also work with Ardeny, Saint-Molène, Marie-Galante, and other islands. So we have with these different territories new actions from the last semester. So this is some information or what we can do in the frame of the Club of Territories. And regarding the promotion, we also plan to make some seminars and to present some new information by the end of the year, and to explain all the supply chain, for instance, and present the competencies in the different areas. Also to continue promoting the use cases studies and the results of the actions that have been implemented currently in the islands I mentioned before, and also to continue showcasing the experimentation. So please feel free to join the club. Here you have the contact detail, the email address that you can send us a question or willing to be to join the Club of Territories. So this is my last words. I would like again to thank the audience and also to thank the speakers for their presentation today. And I hope that you enjoyed what we presented to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Hélène. Thank you, everybody, for your very interesting presentation. I hope you've learned a lot. I was reading on the chat that even non-engineer people have been able to learn a lot about the session. So thank you to the speaker, and thank you everybody for attending the session. I think we have some little time to answer some few questions. Actually, I wrote down a question. Peter has began to answer the question, but I think many people are interested about what kind of different kind of renewable energies we've been working on. And so we had Robert, who had a question saying, the usual renewable energy provision is wind and solar. What other technologies are being considered as good or even better than these solutions? So many people have proposed some different solutions, but regarding the ICE project, I think it's interesting maybe to come back to what we've been experiencing. So I don't know, maybe Peter, if you can say a few words about the other technologies that we've been looking at and discovering and experimenting too, because Gwendal has also explained part of the experimentation on the Ushant Island. So feel free, Peter, Gwendal, to go on with the answer.
Yeah, so as Gwendal mentioned, the project actually sort of started because we were looking to integrate a tidal energy device into Ushant. So that was already being tested. That was being supported, I think, by the French government. So a company called Sabella had a device rated at 1 megawatt, which has been in and out over the course of the project. It sits literally in the water just off Ushant, and the idea was I think it actually does have a subsea cable connecting it to the island. And we wanted to see what we could do to, a tidal device has a sort of sinusoidal, it's kind of like a slightly off, it's deformed by the fact that you can save some of the energy basically, but it has a kind of sinusoidal output. And we wanted to basically see what we could do with other renewables to fill in the gaps, so that instead of having an up and down through the day, then you could fill that in. So we started off by looking at tidal and then building some and then sort of building around that with solar and wind, because as Robert, I'm sure is aware, they're the most economic. But the other side of that was we still needed to be able to flatten, to be responsive really in terms of being able to have enough supply when demand goes up or down. So we did include some storage in that. And actually, well, after we started the project, the French utility decided to install quite an advanced battery. So there's a lithium ion battery, which is now installed alongside the diesel generators, which is, I think it's about 0.5 megawatt hour capacity. And again, that's to basically allow, it's to reduce switching between the diesel, but it would also be very useful for managing with lots of renewables. So yeah, it has been generally looking at the other islands, then we've sort of toyed with other renewables. So on Sark actually is very close to a very, very strong tidal resource. And Plymouth have been doing some looking at that, but I don't think that's going to lead to us actually recommending tidal for Sark, because the tidal technology is basically, if you if you had a scale of 1 to 10 from brand new technology that somebody's just sort of drawn up on their desk to an operational mature technology, solar and wind are sort of 8 to 9-ish, whereas tidal is at, say, 4. So you can't go to the shop and buy a tidal device, whereas you can do that with wind and solar effectively. So it is wind and solar, but in nearly all cases, I think probably in all cases, then we've had to consider storage as well. But what we also started to look at was heat pumps. So on Ushant, everybody, because the electricity is subsidized by the French state, so you only pay what everybody else pays, then everybody uses electricity for heat. Now, the sensible thing to do if you want to sort of try and decarbonize that is, because at the moment the electricity is coming from diesel generators. If you want to decarbonize that, then you want to think about, can we get that demand down? And the easiest way to get demand down would be to replace the electrical heating with either an air source heat pump or a ground source heat pump, so you can get 300 or 400% efficiency out of that. So basically, if you put in a load of air source heat pumps, then the electrical demand for that house should go down by at least 2/3, maybe 3/4. And that basically means you can cut out some of the diesel generation. And when it comes to scaling for the wind and the solar, then you need less wind and solar as well. So that's, and less storage. So I think those are probably the things that are most relevant. It is wind and solar, but it's also storage. And I think in some circumstances, heat pumps is a game changer, but it depends what you're using for your heating. I think on Sark electricity, as I mentioned, I think electricity would be too expensive, so heat pumps is probably not the solution. But yeah, again, wind, solar, but again with storage. So we haven't finished the assessment for Sark at the moment. That was the last one we started, but we did have our students do an assessment 2 years ago, and that was basically the conclusion. So yeah, you're right. I think that those are the two key, but with storage and maybe with heat pumps attached.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this complement of information. I actually have another question, which might be a broad question from Alda, who said, we would like to understand how policies can help countries with energy subsidies. So I don't know if Konstantinos, you can take this question, or Peter, or another partner.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Sebastian? Because
Alda would like to understand how policies can help countries with energy subsidies.
Well, I mean, in many ways, energy subsidies are a thing that is going away gradually. So when we're looking for, say, solar and wind energy in particular, most large-scale projects are now being introduced into the market without subsidies, which I would say is a good thing. It just demonstrates, that these technologies are already approaching that level of maturity that they don't need subsidies anymore. When it comes specifically to islands and other remote areas that normally have been relying on fossil fuels, on diesel generators, for example, again, my argument there would be that typically you can replace these old systems and their very expensive running costs with solar plus batteries or wind, depending on the location and the potential for wind or solar. Typically, that could happen in a net profit situation, even if you're talking about advanced batteries of lithium-ion, for example, because diesel costs are so high that you cannot go very wrong really when replacing that. So that's that. Okay,
thank you very much, Konstantinos. I don't know if Peter, you want to add something, or?
Yeah, I think one of the things we have to acknowledge is that it tends to be that it will be a bit more expensive to install wind and solar on the island because it's relatively small scale. So it can be a bit more expensive than if you were doing it on a mainland, for example. But yeah, I think, there is some potential for using various instruments, I think, to help with overcoming some of the difficulties. So I think with things like heat pumps, particularly where there's very little experience from the consumer, then it can be quite useful to have some kind of stimulus, maybe low-cost loans, because they're quite expensive. So if you want to put one in, it's going to cost you quite a bit of money up front. And certainly some of the islands we've looked at, people are relatively not that well off. So you're dealing with different things. Obviously, if you're dealing with a small island developing state, then there's an issue of how much you could subsidize. If you're dealing with, say, a French or a UK island, then people on average will tend to be poorer on the islands than on the mainland. And so they won't have access to capital. And so something that stimulates that can be really good. So even something like a sort of per unit energy subsidy might not be that useful, because if you haven't got enough money to pay for the heat pump, you still haven't got it, even if you're going to get a subsidy for operating it. So what you need is some kind of access to capital. So things like that can be a big deal. And I think as not just islands, but everybody else tries to decarbonize their heat, then we're going to need some instruments like that, because we need to build trust, but we also need to make things accessible to people. But subsidies in other places, they can be just good for getting people to buy into them, and then you can tail them off quite quickly. And as Konstantinos says, the economics of solar and wind have changed so much in the last 10 years. The cost of solar has come down by at least 80% in 10 years. So it's cheap on the mainlands, but on the islands, actually, because, as I mentioned, you've got these high costs for diesel generation, there should be a lot of economics that are pretty positive without needing those subsidies. But there can be other issues like capital, like trust, where you need to address them with policies. Some of them financial, but others working with communities to raise profiles and have champions for them and things like that, so that you can actually build trust in people putting them in place. Because you need to know, if you're on an island, or if you're even if you're just putting a heat pump in at your grand's house, you need to know it's going to work properly and deliver energy for you, because you can't afford to be without electricity. You can't afford to be without heat in your house. So there's financial and non-financial policies that are really important.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this answer. We are now getting to the end of our session. I think this was really interesting, talking about subsidies, and I can see on the chat that many people think that, subsidies are not the solution, and listening to you and reading everybody. I think that we definitely need, as citizen members of communities, to start changing our way of acting, our way of thinking. So that was my latest words. I again thank you very much for your participation to this session. I know that some of you have been very interested and would like to have the presentation. You know that the presentation has been recorded, so you'll be able to listen to the presentation again. And we will try to see with the organizer how we can also give you a link to download this presentation. And as Hélène has explained before, we will be very happy to get in touch with you in the future. So do not hesitate to contact us. Do not hesitate to join our club, and please stay in touch in the future. Thank you, everybody.